proclaim the gospel, this gives me no ground for boasting, for an obligation is laid on me, and woe betide me if I do not proclaim the gospel. For that if I do this of my own will, I have a reward. But if not of my own will, I am entrusted with a commission. What then is my reward? Just this, that in my proclamation I may make the gospel free of charge, so as not to make full use of my rights in the gospel. For though I am free with respect to all, I have made myself a slave to all, so that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became as a Jew, in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, so that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that I might by any means save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, so that I may share in its blessings. Do you not know that in a race the runners all compete, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win it. Athletes exercise self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable garland, but we an imperishable one. So I do not run aimlessly, nor do I box as though beating the air. But I punish my body and enslave it, so that after proclaiming to others, I myself shall not be disqualified. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
So, if you've ever had a conversation with me, we've probably talked about one of two things. And those two things are either politics or running. And that's because these two things are among the most influential in my life. Running has allowed me to build a closer bond to my mom, allowed me to be a more confident person and express myself however I choose. It's also made me a significantly more outgoing person. In fact, Michelle, if you were to ask me just a few years ago to come up here and preach before the church, my answer absolutely would have been some variation of no. It actually all started because of an English project, and my friends and family can tell you how much I hate English, specifically my English class. That project brought me together with two of my friends who happen to be runners, and now are some of my best friends. They started pushing me and they encouraged me to give running a shot and start running with them. So I finally gave in, and I distinctly remember that very first run. After we finished our English project, we ended up running 8 miles. We had a bike with us, and so it ended up being like, we tried to do 2 miles run, 1 mile bike, but it ended up being me biking most of the time and then running most of the time. But and so to put it bluntly, I suffered through that run. My lungs were burning, everything hurt, and it was hard. But when I finally finished, the feeling was amazing. There was this incredible sense of accomplishment. It was like something I had never felt before. My friends kept pushing me, and eventually they convinced me to start signing up for actual races. And now fast forward 2 years, here I am. Because that's what running does. It pushes you past what you thought you were ever capable of. When you see somebody crossing a finish line or pulling off a great feat of athleticism, it looks incredible and it looks amazing and easy. But we all know the truth. It's not effortless. What people see for a few moments on race day is the result of years of hidden, grueling, and painful discipline. It's early mornings, strict routines, pushing through the urge to quit, training when nobody's watching, and keeping to a strict diet. You don't win a race by accident. Yet when it comes to our spiritual lives, many of us approach faith as if it's just a casual and effortless stroll in the park. We expect to grow in maturity, to overcome deep-seated struggles, and to impact the world for God just by simply showing up, sitting up in a pew, and then going home completely unchanged. We treat discipleship like it's a hobby rather than a pursuit. But Paul knew that a casual faith would never endure. So writing to the church in Corinth, which was a culture that was very obsessed with sports and entertainment, kind of like we are today, he uses very vivid and high-stakes imagery of the athletic arena to kind of wake them up. So if we look at 1 Corinthians 9:24-27, it says, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, do not run like someone running aimlessly, and do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize." If we want to finish our lives well, and if we want our faith to mean something, Paul gives us 3 main rules for running the race that we are running. The first rule is to run with ultimate purpose. So Paul starts this out with a question, and then it contains a challenge. So it says, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize." To understand just how punchy this was, you have to understand the context a little bit. The Corinthians didn't just know about sports, they lived sports. They hosted what was called the Isthmian Games, which were second only to the Olympics. And so every 2 years, the greatest athletes from around the Mediterranean would flock to the city and compete in the games. And we today understand this kind of sports obsession perfectly. Think about what it takes to win at the highest level today. Let's think about the recent college football national championship, where the Indiana Hoosiers shocked this was for you, Tanya. Shocked the world with their first ever national title in school history. They went 16-0 for the first time, really in history, since BYU did it back in the 1800s, and they were the most losingest team in college football history to win the title. Now their quarterback, old quarterback, and now the Raiders quarterback, Fernando Mendoza, spent the entire game getting hit and thrown to the ground. He played through a bloody lip. He ended up not being able to play the second snap because he got thrown to the ground so hard. But then he came back, he kept grinding out fourth down conversions, and ended up winning that trophy. Or think about Super Bowl 60, where Sam Darnold led the Seattle Seahawks to a championship. Darnold was a quarterback who had been on 5 different teams in 8 seasons. He had been benched and traded and written off by almost everyone, and everybody thought his career was over. But he kept training, he kept pushing, he kept practicing, and he stayed disciplined so that when his big moment finally came, he finally could lift the Lombardi Trophy. So what were these athletes running for? Well, Paul tells us they do it to get a crown that will not last. In the Corinthian Games, the grand prize wasn't a gold medal or a massive trophy. It was a wreath made of pine ivy or withered celery. They strained every muscle, disciplined their bodies, and pushed past their limits for a piece of just dying vegetation. So Paul's point is a convicting contrast. If an athlete will sacrifice everything for a crown of celery that turns to dust in a week, how much should we be willing to give for an imperishable crown, for an eternal relationship with God, for the souls of people around us, and for a legacy of faithfulness? Paul isn't saying that only one person gets into heaven. Salvation is a free gift of grace, but what he is saying is that we should live with the same intensity, focus, and drive as an athlete trying to win the single top prize. Are you wanting to win, or are you just jogging in place? And so this takes us into the second rule that Paul gives us for running our own race, which is fight with absolute focus. So Paul shifts his metaphor from the racetrack to the boxing ring. In verse 26, he says, "Therefore, do not run like someone running aimlessly, and do not fight like a boxer beating the air." Have you ever seen a boxer shadow box? They stand in front of a mirror or in the middle of the ring. They throw fast and sharp punches at nothing. It looks impressive and it looks flashy, but shadow boxing doesn't win fights because there's just no opponent. You are just beating the air. To win a real race or a real fight, it requires unbelievable focus on the course in front of you. Let's think back to the London Marathon. History was made not once that day, but twice. Sebastian Solway became the first person in history to officially break the legendary 2-hour barrier in a marathon. But then just 11 seconds later, the second person in history did the exact same thing. What makes the second place run so mind-boggling, besides the fact that the only person to ever run faster in history was at the exact same race on the exact same day, was that it was his first marathon ever. His name was Yomif Kahelka, and he was a legendary track star who's used to running on much shorter distances around an oval. And then he transitioned to a 26.2-mile road race, which meant he had to have absolute focus over every single mile. If he lost focus for even just a little bit and let his mind drift, he would have hit the wall and let his pace falter a lot quicker. And if you want to hear about 2 more clearly professional athletes, here's a little bit of the story about the time my mom and I ran a marathon. Now, if you've ever run a marathon or even just a really long race, you know that 26.2 miles is a mental game probably more than it's a physical game. You have to focus, and on that day, my mom and I kind of had a little bit of a weird rhythm. You know, we started out for about the first 3 minutes together, and then I took her over for a little bit, and then she caught me back up, and then we kept doing that for a little bit, until about mile 18. And once I hit mile 18, right in front of the Capitol building, I've never felt that bad in pain before. The only thing I remember after that is running up to my friend and holding my quads, it was just spasming. But then we got to mile 22, and I couldn't go anymore. And so then I finally waited for my mom to catch up, and we ended up running the rest of that race together. And if you know anything about marathons, mile 20 to 22 is usually where runners hit the wall, and it's where your body just completely runs out of fuel, your brain tells you to quit, and everything hurts. And so, like I said, at mile 22, we caught back up to each other, and we kind of decided that we wanted to finish this horrible run together. And after 26.2 grueling miles, we finally crossed that finish line while holding hands. So Paul is warning us against wasting our spiritual energy on things that don't matter. It's incredibly easy to become a Christian who is highly active but just completely ineffective. We burn ourselves out fighting the wrong battles. We argue on the internet, we get tangled up in petty disagreements, and we obsess over external distractions, all while ignoring the real battles raging inside of our own hearts. When we fight blindly, we ignore our real enemies: pride, greed, bitterness, and apathy. Paul basically says, I don't box the air, I know exactly what I'm aiming at. Spiritual focus means looking squarely at our own lives and saying, that is the struggle I need to hand over to God. That is the habit I need to break. And that is where I need to focus my energy. And so that brings us to the third rule that Paul gives us, which is to discipline with holy urgency. In verse 27, Paul says, no, I strike a blow to my body and I make it my slave, which is it's probably the most intense verse in the passage. The Greek word Paul uses here for strike a blow is a boxing term that literally means to give a black eye. He's using strong and shocking language intentionally to make a point. If you do not master your desires will master you. We live in a culture that tells us that the ultimate good is to satisfy every craving we have. If you feel it, do it. And if you want it, buy it. But as any runner knows, a successful athlete cannot let their immediate comfort dictate the terms. You have to tell your body when to wake up, how to train, and how fast to run. Spiritual discipline, things like regular prayer, reading scripture, serving, and practicing generosity, it's not about legalism. It's not about trying to make God love us more, because God already loves us perfectly. Spiritual discipline is about training our spiritual muscles so that we are actually capable of following Jesus when things get difficult. It is choosing what we want most over what we want now. So let's look at how Paul ends this verse. He says, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. If anyone could have coasted on past achievements, it was Paul. Yet he knew that past faithfulness does not guarantee future endurance. The race isn't judged by how fast you start, it's judged by how you finish. He lived with a holy urgency, knowing he needed to stay disciplined every single day. So as I close, let's think about a stadium. In any stadium, there are usually two groups of people. There are the spectators in the stands, and then there are the athletes on the field. The spectators, usually they have a great time, they watch, they cheer, they critique, and then they go home completely unchanged. They might be a little bit mad that their team lost, like Penn State, or they might be happy that their team won after an amazing touchdown. But the athletes are the ones who are actually sweating and straining and pushing for the prize. Too many of us treat the Christian life like a spectator sport. We sit in the grandstands, we critique the worship, we rate the sermon, we watch others do the work of ministry, and then we go home completely unchanged. But Jesus didn't call us to be fans in the stands. He called us to be runners on the track. Running changed my life. It gave me confidence and brought me to this stage today. It required friends who cared enough to push me out of my comfort zone, and we need that same kind of community in our faith. So this week, where do you need to step out of the grandstands? I have three questions to think about as you kind of go into this next week and next race that you're running. So the first question is there an area of your life where you have been running aimlessly without real spiritual purpose? The second question is there a habit or distraction that is causing you to beat the air and waste your energy? And the third one is, what is one small daily discipline you can implement this week to train your heart to love God more than comfort? We are not running to earn God's love. We are running because through Jesus Christ, the ultimate prize has already been secured for us. He ran the ultimate race, he endured the cross, and now he stands at the finish line, cheering us on. So let's lace up our shoes, lay down our distractions, and run in such a way as to get the prize.